At the risk of stating the obvious, that was a brilliantly executed qualifying session by Max Verstappen. Well, let's give Red Bull some credit as well, and Adrian Newey for that RB19, against opposition that basically fragmented. Okay, Fernando was there, P3, very good. Nico Hulkenberg, excellent P2 for Haas Ferrari. But against that background, look what Max achieved, because he made it look incredibly simple. Yeah, there was the occasional jink, occasional slide, which other drivers didn't correct the way Max did. And there was that lovely manipulation of the car between turns 1 and 2 that enabled him always, apart from one lap when he had a slight bit of understeer going into 2, but enabled him always not to have to punish the car into 1 in order to try to gain some ground. And we saw many other drivers, particularly Carlos Sainz and Sergio Perez, as predicted, trying to break late into 1 to make up time there, and as a result running wide and losing the lap. And it's a lot of lap to lose because it's the first corner, of course, in order to recover the time. And so Max was brilliant there, fabulous in high-speed braking, and organised on top of it, and basically calling the shots as much as any driver can when the weather conditions are changing as much as they are. Very calm, very organised. So I've put that in a graphic. So let's go through that in detail and have a look at how it all added up for Max Verstappen. So after a wet Q3, and when Max looked very good, it was nonetheless very iffy going into qualifying. The track was wet, it had stopped raining, inters were the tyre, but maybe somebody was going to try slicks. Max and Red Bull's solution was just to get out there as soon as possible and get in a banker lap for Q1. They had to get, obviously, into the top 15. And the thinking there was not, well, let's wait for the track to get a little bit quicker, maybe, because for sure it was going to get quicker. They were thinking, towards the end, all the rabbits are going to be out there on new sets of inters. We don't need the traffic. We don't need dramas. Let's get the time in there. It'll be good enough for sure to get through to Q2. So that's what they did. They went out on the inters. They were ready to go as soon as the pit lane opened. And almost immediately, on a quick lap, Max saw Guanyu Zhou and radio back straight away. It said, looks like there's an issue with another car, and immediately aborted the lap and came in. Fernando Alonso at Aston Martin, interestingly, didn't do that. They finished the lap. And again, that's just, to me, that comes under the heading of just on top of your game, coming in immediately, getting ready for when the track will reopen. So they did that, and they did that incredibly efficiently, to the point where they were out in the pit lane, ready to go 3 minutes before the pit lane opened again for the restart of Q1. And so that's what he did. If you look at the numbers there, 24.1, 22.8, 21.9, 21.7, 20.8, it's a beautiful progression. That again has to be seen alongside the interruptions that virtually every other driver faced because of traffic. This is Max out on the track early and then pacing himself beautifully. And he was quickest at the end of Q1 by 0.6. Job done, Q1. Q2 was even more of a question mark because the track had continued to dry and slicks were possibly an option. Alex Albon at Williams chose that option. We'll get onto that in a minute. Let's just focus on Max. Their thinking at Red Bull was, we'll get in the banker lap again on intermediates and then come in immediately, come what may, for slicks. But we've got to get that banker lap in just in case the rain comes sooner, or because the track is a little bit greasier than we think. Max for sure is going to be quick enough in those conditions to get through into Q3. So they send him out on those inters. He did a really good banker lap, 20.1. That would have been good enough to have got him through to Q3 had he not then stopped for slicks, which he did. So then he came into slicks before Ferrari did so, before Aston Martin did so, and before Mercedes did so. Straight out again on slicks, and again a beautiful progression, 20.3, getting the tyres warm, and then 19.0, good enough for P2, again behind Alex Albon. He didn't need to do that, as it turned out, but it was good enough, easily to sail through into Q3. Towards the end, it started to rain, and some of the runners went back to intermediates again, and again we'll get onto that. Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez too, who didn't get through to Q3 because of that. So Q3 now, the rain is falling quite heavily, and again a lot of question marks as to how that session is going to run. Is the track going to get quicker? Is the rain going to ease? Is it going to get worse? When to go out and when to do it? Again, Max first out on the track and puts in a beautiful lap, 27.0, with the tyres still semi-warm, good enough for pole, as it turned out. The next lap, with the tyres right on temperature, at 25.8, and that was going to give him the pole by 1.3 seconds. Okay, that's a slightly inflated margin because immediately after he did that time, and we should note here, he did that time because they were so organised at Red Bull just to get him out first every time. Because straight after that, we had a red flag caused by Oscar Piastri in the McLaren hitting the wall out of a chicane and damaging the back of the car. And by the time that was cleared up, the rain was falling much heavier. So job done, pole position for Max Verstappen yet again. Although it was interesting to see Max rushing in to change to extreme wets right at the end, just in case he needed to, and maybe he can get an exploratory lap on those extreme wets anyway. Good information to have. So an amazing qualifying session for Max Verstappen. Easy to write it off by saying, yeah, Max dominant again, but really good in conditions in which Sergio Perez was floundering in the other Red Bull. So definitely it wasn't easy. Charles Leclerc didn't get through to Q3. And many other drivers had problems as well, particularly in traffic. And Carlos Sainz in FP3 had quite heavily damaged the Ferrari going into turn one and braking too late and hitting the wall, back end coming out. And so, yeah, against that background, you have to rate Max Verstappen's pole as just a perfect job on a very, very difficult day. Now, before we get on to Nico Hulkenberg and Fernando did a really good job to qualify second and third, let's look at how the opposition, the senior opposition for Max fell apart. Prime amongst that was Charles Leclerc, who had been, as I said yesterday, toe-to-toe, really, with Max yesterday in terms of when they were out, matching them on a full tank run in the dry. And then in FP3 this morning, very, very closely matched and being as quick as one another within a tenth or so in any given track condition. And yet when it came down to the pressure, Ferrari again made a massive mess. Difficult times for Frederic Vasseur in his new stewardship at Ferrari. I've made the point already that I don't think they're getting the best from Charles. As for Sergio Perez in the other Red Bull, struggled in Q1, struggled in Q2, couldn't get temperatures right on the slick or on the intermediate, always seemed to be in traffic at the wrong place at the wrong time, and that was the difference. And yeah, you could say, well, why didn't Red Bull bring Sergio Perez into that? Well, there are two sides of the garage at Red Bull, as we know, going back to the Mark Webber, Sebastian Vettel days, and it's nothing to do with wanting to favour Max or favour Sergio Perez. It's how to get the best from both groups in the garage. And on this occasion, Sergio Perez just couldn't get the tyres to work, pretty much as we saw in Melbourne and then in qualifying in the Spanish Grand Prix. So a very disappointing moment for Red Bull with that performance. Again, you got to think, when they look at the times, they think, well, why aren't we running Nico Hulkenberg in the other car? Talk about the perfect number two to Max Verstappen. Well, he wouldn't want to say number two, of course. Great job again by Nico. How many times have we seen him go well in these semi-wet conditions, going right back to that pole we had in Brazil for Williams? Just a brilliant drive right out of the box, a little bit like Max, straight out and doing that lap time at the beginning of Q3. And just to get through to Q2 was a major achievement. His teammate Kevin Magnussen wasn't able to do that. So congratulations to Nico, really, really good job. And to the Haas Ferrari team, just a bunch of racers there, aren't they? And then P3, Fernando Alonso, always looked good through the chicanes, very drivable car. Looks to be the best car over the chicanes here in Canada, and chicanes are a big thing, the curbs of the chicanes, that is. And yeah, just got a good compromise out of it. The car isn't going to be in the drive. It's a dry race tomorrow, and signs are that it will be. It won't be as quick as the Red Bull in a straight line, which is a big problem around Montreal. Fernando saying afterwards, yeah, let's really take the race to Max, saying that to Danica Patrick, who was doing the interviews, saying, well, she said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, 2 seconds behind rather than 20 seconds behind. Yeah, well, we'll wait and see at the end of the race tomorrow, assuming Max has no problems, how they are, where they are in relation to Max. But yeah, good job by Fernando. Real professional, classy performance in qualifying by the old master, who just gets on top of it and puts in the laps when he needs to. Nico Hulkenberg in front of him, he'll be thinking, yeah, I'll have him in a lap or two. Maybe him to turn one, knowing Fernando. Around the outside, turn one from where he is, maybe, possible. Let's look at some of the other results. Mercedes, said yesterday they looked pretty good. They were out of sync yesterday, running their full tanks at the beginning and then going into the soft tire right at the end, so they finished the day with headlines. I suppose quite a good thing. Looking back now, it's probably quite a good thing to do from a morale, PR point of view, I guess, to have the cars 1 and 2 when everybody else is running full tanks. Well, everybody else, most others. And they went well today. Not very good in FP3. They couldn't get the temperatures to work, but they did a lot of good work there in the break. And Lewis and George did very well in those cars. I think Mercedes in my opinion, flattered slightly by the quality of the drivers. It's a bit of an edgy car still compared with the Red Bull, compared with the Aston Martin. When they hit the odd bit of standing water, the Mercedes really snaps, and the Red Bull does too, and there's some lovely drifts with Max holding it, particularly coming out of the hairpin through that kink. But Lewis was just sublime in the way his car control when he was losing it at high speed was really, really good. I mean, talk about it. He's been around so long, and yet his car control is still absolutely perfect. Brilliant to watch. So that was good. They got the temperatures right. Lewis correctly moaning about he couldn't see anything in the rear vision mirrors in Q2 when it was getting bad and there was crud everywhere, when the track was drying and there was crud everywhere, and I'm sure that was the case with many of the drivers, because you saw a lot of impeding going on, and Lewis was correct, I think, to say, I want to come in and have the mirrors clean. I don't think they did that in the end because it was important for him to stay out, but it just shows how difficult still the whole rear vision thing is in Formula One, and that's why we saw so much impeding, I think. And Max said the same thing in the wet as well. He couldn't see a thing behind him. So yeah, very good job by the two Mercedes drivers. Worth noting that the only two teams that had two cars in Q3 were Mercedes, effectively two number ones, really quick driver in the other car, George Russell. McLaren, of course, had Lando looking really good, as I've been saying over the last couple of races, and Oscar Piastri, who was doing a really good job until he lost it coming out of the middle chicane. We saw Yuki Tsunoda have a similar spin, but he came out of the throttle beautifully and just kind of flicked the car around and got it going, whereas Oscar kind of locked everything and just went off into the back. Very easy for me to say that from being a couch potato watching that. Maybe they were different in terms of their dynamics, but it just looked to me as if Yuki did a better job of, once he'd lost the back end, of just making sure the thing didn't hit the wall. Speaking of high-speed spins, Lance Stroll had a big one coming out of that first chicane, where the road, there are curves there, but it is flat. As Max showed, it was flat, but it's edgy, and it's flat, easy flat in the drive, but in the wet, semi-wet, it wasn't. And Stroll was out right at the end, trying to get in, obviously, to Q3, and had a massive lose. Must have been fifth gear, I would imagine, at that point, and the way the car just snapped around. Again, he didn't hit anything. I'm not sure that was massively brilliant car control from Lance. I think it was more by luck than judgment, but again, impressive to see that. Didn't hit anything. I think he did. He just touched the nose on the barrier from memory, but he drove back to the pits quite without a problem. So Lewis and George were fourth and fifth. Pierre Gasly he always seems to attract drama. There's always drama going on around Pierre Gasly. I don't know why it is. Maybe it's all that tennis ball stuff before the race, but massive balking by Carlos Sainz. Whenever anybody was balked or impeded going into the last chicane at the beginning or the end of a flying lap, Carlos was there going unbelievably slowly just before he was starting his flying lap. It happened about 3 times with Carlos Sainz. I'd be surprised if he doesn't get some sort of penalty, because I think he's been cited in at least 2 impeding episodes post-qualifying. Anyway, that's what happened to Pierre Gasly. He would for sure have got through to Q2 and probably would have got through to Q3. He was quick enough, but he was irate. They were following him as he got out of the car, and I was hoping he was going to walk down to the Ferrari garage. But of course, by the time he would have got there, Carlos was already out, helmet on, in the Ferrari in the pit lane. Correct decision in that case. But Esteban Ocon, again, another good professional job in the Alpine to be 6th quickest in that car. Very good performance. He had his issues. As well. That car doesn't look particularly reliable. Lots going on, but another good performance from Esteban. McLaren 7th and 9th. Piastri hitting the wall. Good performance from McLaren overall. You've got to say, from where they started the year, looking good, continuing to look impressive in qualifying. Let's see that translate into a race tomorrow. Sandwiching the Ferrari of Carlos Sainz, which never looked convincing in qualifying after that shunt this morning. And then Alex Albon was P10 in the Williams Mercedes. He did a lap, but I braked a little bit too late into the last chicane, aborted the lap, so it doesn't actually show us a time at Q3. Again, then the Piastri red came out and nobody went out after that effectively. But brilliant to get through to Q3. Brilliant to run the slicks in Q2. The only driver, Lando, as he was going out of the pit, said, maybe we should be going on slicks. Typical Lando. And it would have been nice had to seen him on slicks, to be honest. But going back to Alex Albon, what a great choice. I think if you are Max Verstappen and you've got that sort of performance package, you definitely have the philosophy of a banker lap on intermediates straight onto slicks, which is what he did. And he executed that. The team executed that perfectly. But if you're everybody else, there was nothing to lose. If you're Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, again, why didn't they have him on slicks at the start? We know he's had a tire temperature issue with, we saw that in Barcelona, with in that situation, slicks in cold ambience, cold track conditions. The more laps you give him, the more chance he's going to get those tires up to temperature. But Ferrari didn't do that. They did the predictable option again of just putting him out on the intermediates, and then they came in a little bit late, and then they possibly took a bit longer. I don't know what happened, but they took a bit longer. He did 5 laps on the slicks, about the same as Max Verstappen, but he just couldn't get the temperature in the tires. He was sliding all, this is Charles Leclerc, sliding all over the place, braking, just tires weren't up to temperature. And I think in these situations, I mean, I was talking to a few people going into Q2, you put yourself you try to put yourself in the position of a team manager, and you say, or a team principal, whatever it is, performance engineer, and you say, what would I be doing right now? If I was running Leclerc, if I was running Mercedes, I would have put at least one Mercedes driver onto slicks, and I would have put Perez on slicks. Why not? And they worked. It took time to get them up to temperature, but they worked. And as I say, given the way Charles struggled in Barcelona with temperature, you would imagine they'd think, give him as much time as we possibly can on these slicks. And it might work. The chances are we'll be through anyway. And what were they thinking? That Charles might crash or spin or something on the slicks? I mean, if you don't have enough confidence in your driver like that, why have a driver like Charles Leclerc in the first place, would be my argument. And so I just thought it was all very disappointing, and reflects really well on the way they're thinking now at Williams. And probably a lot of that is due to James Vowles. So congratulations to him and his decision-making and the confidence he has in Alex Albon, because Alex is a little bit fluid as a driver. He's a beautifully seamless driver, as we saw in the Red Bull days. But he is prone to the odd thing. So it's a bit of a risk when you send a guy like Albon out in slicks and semi-wet. But if you give him the confidence of saying, no, you can do it. You've got the talent. You're going to make it. Look what happened. He was quickest in Q2. Fabulous. Great to see. And the Williams, it's a quick car in a straight line. Okay, it's P10 now. It's a shame that he's not P5 or 6 or whatever, or maybe up there with Nico Hulkenberg. But good performance. And all it does, really, I think, is underline the poor decision-making at Ferrari. And to some extent, around the Sergio Perez side of the garage, I think. Final word, I suppose, has to be for Alfa Romeo, because they look really good. Valtteri looked really good yesterday, but kind of as predicted, as per normal, it all fell apart in qualifying. Valtteri couldn't get temperature in the tyres, and Guan Yu had an issue in Q1. They got it sorted, and it didn't really go very well after that. So yeah, another disappointing Saturday for Alfa Romeo.